I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I have a big box of bare yarn from a new to me brand that I'm excited to open up and test for the first time. Knomad Yarn recently reached out to me and offered to send me some of their yarn bases to try out and test for myself to see what I thought. And so I thought that I would bring you along this journey from first impressions to the packaging, all the way to dyeing up a few of the bases, and then finally we'll take a look and see how their prices compare to other brands that I use before giving my final thoughts. This video is not sponsored, but Knomad did send me the yarn for free, and I'm really excited to take a closer look because they have some yarn bases that seem pretty unique, at least based on what I've tried from other suppliers so far. So it does feel like the box is jam-packed, and so the box did not arrive crushed. Ooh, okay, and we've got a lot, oh my, we've got a lot of, of postcards in here. Oh, these are postcards about the different bases. Each of them shows a picture and has some information about the base, which I'm assuming that this is in everyone's package and not just mine, but that's really handy. And, ooh, we've got a little sticker and a tote bag. Okay, so the bag has their website and their branding on the other side. I don't know if this is something that's included in every order, but maybe it's because of the size of the order. I'm not sure. But ooh, and now we've got to the yarn. I'm gonna run through the bases that I have and then I'll take some out of the packaging. I've got the Marshmallow DK, which is 100% Superwash Merino. The Salcanty, a bulky 2-ply Superwash Merino. Steam, which is 80% Superwash Merino, 20% Alpaca. Snowdrift, which is their 75% Superwash Merino, 25% Nylon stock yarn. Asperitas, which is 50% recycled wool, 50% Tencel, a blend I haven't tried before. And then finally, a single skein of each of Eggshell and Duo. Eggshell is 70% Superwash Merino, 30% Nylon, and Duo is 80% Superwash Merino, 20% Nylon. So there are 3 bases here from one company that have 20, 25, or 30% nylon with Superwash Merino. And that is something that I want to do a separate video on, comparing these 3 bases to see how much the nylon content makes a difference in how maybe they kettle dye up. And so maybe we'll dye each of them separately. Before going in and touching the wool, the other things I know about Knomad is that the yarn is ethically sourced, mucilage free, and they use recycled nylon in a lot of their yarn bases. And so I tried to pop up on screen which of the bases I was opening up have recycled nylon in them. As far as packaging, these bags are very thick plastic, and each base appears to be individually labeled with a label that has the fiber content on it. Now I have Snowdrift right here in my hands, and I'm curious to see how many plies it is. It is not super soft or bouncy right now, but I have a feeling it's gonna plump up when dyeing. It is a 4-ply, 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon yarn. The yarn is soft. I don't immediately say, ooh, this is the softest yarn I've ever felt in my life, but it also has not been dyed and had that wash and process yet. Some yarn that comes straight from the mill is not as fluffed and soft as it is until after it's been washed and air dried from the dyeing process. So while I think that it is soft, it's a little bit stiff, like air-dried blue jeans kind of feel, but less extreme. And I'll add that the more that I'm touching it, the softer it's getting. Yeah, Snowdrift seems like a nice staple 75-25 stock yarn. I'm gonna set up this video a little differently than the way I normally do it. And so I'm about to go through and touch and give a first impression of each base, and then I will show you the dyeing of that base. I'm planning on doing a kettle dyed tonal for each of these bases, so that way we can compare the dyed base to the undyed base before setting up a dye kettle. And I'm planning to dye each of the bases a completely different color because my goal is to compare the dyed yarn to the undyed yarn of the same yarn base yarn line versus comparing them to one another, at least in terms of this particular video. You'll be able to find details of the colors and depths of shade and recipes that I use for each of the bases down in the video description. All of the yarn came with 3 pretty loose ties on it, which was really nice. We'll see if they tighten too much during the dyeing process or not, but 3 ties is really great. I am pre-soaking all of the yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes before we kettle dye any of the yarn. For the Snowdrift, I have 16 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I am gonna add 1 gram of Dharma Pistachio Acid dye. This is actually a new to me color that I haven't used before, but I'm really excited to try it out. The pot is not yet hot, but I'm gonna let it heat up with the dye and have everything be nice and hot before we add our yarn. And I am gonna rinse out the cup. All of the tools and equipment that I'm using are dedicated for dyeing yarn and are never used for the preparation of food. And when I was measuring out and dissolving the dyes, I did wear a P100 respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. I'm going for some less saturated colors today, mainly because I don't play with them as often, and also because I really want to highlight the yarn and compare before dyeing and after dyeing really easily. And if I was using colors that were too saturated, that would just be a little bit harder to compare. Okay, we are nice and hot. So now let's take our yarn and quickly add it to the pot and stir it around. Ooh, this is a very, very pretty color. It is a very light color, but actually feels very accurate to the label. So I am happy. But anyway, I am going to leave this in here on medium-low heat, just below a simmer. It does need to heat back up a tiny bit for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, our dye bath is clear, and this is a very lovely pistachio color. Very, very accurate from the swatch. I don't think it's showing up right on camera. This may be a little bit more accurate to what the color looks like. It is very, very pretty, and I really like it. But I'm now going to set it aside to cool completely so we can wash it. Let's start washing our Superwash Merino and Superwash Merino Nylon blends. I think now you can start to feel that pistachio color. It's so much more pastel than everything else, but it'll still be able to give us a good look at how the finished dried yarn goes. I'm now gonna add just a bit of some clear dish soap to our rinse bath, but I do not think I'm seeing any color bleeding, which is always great. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and rinse out the soap. Then I'm gonna put all this yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry so we can go wash the rest of the yarn. Here is the finished Snowdrift yarn. I really, really like the pistachio color. And now I think I can easily show that there are 3 zip ties on here, and they are pretty loose. I'm not seeing any like choke points or resist points from where they were gripping the yarn too tightly. I think I wondered if the yarn would bloom and get a little fluffier through dyeing, and it didn't really. The yarn is very similar in fluffiness and texture as it was before I dyed it. The dyed yarn might be a hair softer than the bare form. It is not the softest 75-25 Superwash Merino nylon yarn I have ever felt. It does feel like that it's very sturdy and could hold up to some high wear, but it is not. I'll just say that this is probably my least favorite of the 5 bases that I tested in this video, which isn't to say that it's bad. It's just I can't see myself switching from the other 75-25 sock yarns that I use to this. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't be happy to knit with this yarn. I hope that that makes sense. I do really, really like the color that we ended up with. And you can see the like soft, subtle tonal variation that we have here. It is really, really pretty. But let's go look at the next base. The Marshmallow DK. It also feels a little bit like it's gonna plump and soften up through the dyeing process. There's a tiny bit of stiffness to it, but I think it's also probably 4-ply. This is a 4-ply 100% Superwash Merino, and again, feels very like lofty. It's not a high twist yarn. All of them are softening up more when I handle them. And for a good example of what I'm talking about, the yarn plumping after you dye it, go and check out Dyepot Weekly 182, where I dyed the Bear Zara yarn from Filatura de Crosa, and it was really stretched out when it came in the bare form, but then it plumped and bloomed beautifully through the dyeing process. And whatever I dye in this video, we'll compare it to the undyed form at the end of the video. For the Marshmallow DK, I am starting with 16 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, and 1 gram of baby blue eyes, which is a lot more pigmented than you might think from the poster swatch. But since the pot is still cool, I can add the cup in to rinse it out. And now we're gonna let things heat up so we can add the yarn. This color is gonna be a little bit more intense, but let's now add our pre-soaked DK yarn. Just sort of popping it in, raising it up. And I am going to let it heat up a little bit because adding the cold yarn does change the temperature, but we're gonna let it heat on the stovetop for at least 30 minutes. And I may come stir or lift and lower it in the meantime, or I might not. After 30 minutes, there's a hint of some blue left. So I am going to add another 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and give this, well, I think almost everything is gone, but I'm gonna go ahead and give it another 20 minutes. All right. It looks like our dye bath has pretty much cleared. I am going to take our yarn, our beautiful tonal DK, and set it aside to cool so we can wash it. Here is the finished Marshmallow DK yarn. We've got a beautiful blue tonal here. And I would say that the yarn held up really, really well through dyeing, which honestly you would expect. I think texturally it is very similar before dyeing to after. It might be a little hard to see. I do think that this one sort of fluffed up and bloomed a little bit through the dyeing process. Some of these comparisons to other yarns that I felt before are a little hard. Marshmallow DK is not the softest Superwash Merino I've ever felt, which is to say it is still very soft, and it's not, I don't consider it to be scratchy. It's just not as soft as some other brands that I have used. Evaluating a new yarn base that is so similar to something that you use and dye all the time is a little hard, because my expectations of the yarn is that it would be good, it would be fine, which it is. But in order to knock my socks off, it would need to be like above and beyond what I use regularly already. And so like the previous yarn, this is a base that I'm excited to dye more of. I'd be happy to knit with, but isn't necessarily one that I would go back and buy more because I have other DK bases that I personally prefer. So right here I have the Snowdrift and Marshmallow DK from Knomad. And I've put them next to a Swish DK and a Stroll fingering weight yarn from KnitPicks. And these have the same fiber content, these have the same fiber content. The Stroll is a little bit loftier, which could aid to the softness feel. I would say that the Snowdrift looks like it has a tighter twist. The yarn looks a little bit thinner, like there's a little bit less air in there, but this would also increase the durability. Yardage wise, these have pretty much the exact same yardage. And a brief comparison of the twist between the Marshmallow DK and the Swish DK is that the yarn looks nearly identical. These also have the exact same yardage and the same weight. It's just the Swish DK is just a little bit softer. And while I've compared these bases to each other based on feel and all of that, I'm going to talk about all of the Knomad pricing more in depth in a moment. But I figured since I'm comparing the feel of KnitPicks and Knomad for these staple bases, I should talk about pricing here as well. For each of the skeins, I've put 2 numbers up on the screen. The number on top is the price of an individual bare skein of yarn, and the price below in parentheses is the price of an individual skein when you purchase a full bag, which would be 10 skeins from Knomad or 20 skeins from KnitPicks. So when we compare the actual prices of KnitPicks Swish and Stroll to Knomad Snowdrift and Marshmallow DK, the individual skein is cheaper at KnitPicks, but the bulk pricing is cheaper from Knomad. Both KnitPicks and Knomad do offer free shipping with a minimum purchase. KnitPicks minimum is a bit lower, but that is an option on both websites. And now let's go take a look at the 3 other yarn bases I'm reviewing in this video. And I'll add that I really, really like what's coming up. I'm very curious about the, ooh, now this one feels like a pillow. The Salcanty, which is the bulky weight. There are 109 yards per 100 grams, so it's not like incredibly thick, but it's 2-ply and like a pillow soft, very, very soft. For the Salcanty, I'm in the Dyepot that had 16 cups of water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I'm gonna add 1 gram of Spearmint Breeze acid dye. I am going to rinse out the cup. This is the same dye bath we used for the Snowdrift, and we're gonna heat this back up. I think the Salcanty base is one of the ones I am the most excited about. I love a good fluffy, bulky weight yarn. Ooh, this color is so pretty. All right, I think that right now I am going to go ahead and add a little bit more acid. We got the yarn in fast enough, and so we've got good coverage. So I'm going to add another 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, bringing us closer to a proportion of 2 tablespoons of vinegar per 8 cups of water. And now I am going to leave this here for 30 minutes. It has been 30 minutes. And let's see how we're doing. There is a tiny, tiny hint of color left. So I'm going to go ahead and add more vinegar. I'll just add 3 more tablespoons. So this one has a pretty high vinegar content now. Or not that high, but higher compared to some of the other bases, but we're doing a different color on each base. And I'm gonna let this sit now for 20 minutes. Okay, let's see. There's maybe a hair of something left in, and since I no longer know how much acid was in this pot, I'm gonna reset it before the next color anyway. But we got a gorgeous, gorgeous green. I don't think I'm doing the color justice here. It is a gorgeous minty green base. Now, one thing I want to point out is that the 3 ties were loose enough that in the dyeing process, they all sort of migrated down to one end, even though they are butterfly ties, which on one hand, that's not great, but that's more probably my fault through the whole process, but also shows that they are loosely tied. I adore this yarn base. I knew from when I first opened the yarn that this was going to be one of my favorites, and I absolutely love it. It is so incredibly soft. It dyed up beautifully, and this is one that I, in a heartbeat, would reorder. I don't dye bulky yarn very often, but this is a really good one, and ultimately it comes down to the price, which I don't know off the top of my head right now. I'm sure I'll pop it up on the screen, and I'm going to evaluate prices on everything more once I go through all the dyeing, but the yarn is just spectacular. Not only is this yarn super soft as you dye it, but it bloomed. Oh man, see how like thick and plump that is. That is so, so, so pretty. Oh my goodness. I imagine therefore that there was some shrinking in terms of yardage, but I just really, really like this yarn. I'm not entirely sure yet if this is my favorite, but clearly I love it and really like it and want to make a bunch of hats with it. So I'm very, very excited about this base. So Steam feels very, very soft. It is a higher twist, bouncy 2-ply yarn. It's pretty bouncy already. Or maybe it's not that it's necessarily higher twist, but because the plies are thicker, that contributes to that. It's a worsted Aran weight yarn, and it's 80% superwash merino, 20% alpaca, which is probably why it is so, so, so soft. This is a really fun base, and I'm excited to play with it. I mean, I'm excited to play with all of these, but this one feels very, very unique. For Steam, I've reset the pot with 16 cups of water and 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. So we need to heat this up again. And I've just added 1 gram of Valentine Blush acid dye. So Steam is our Superwash Merino Alpaca blend. And once I add the yarn to the pot when things are warm, I will probably add more acid right away because it's a base that likely needs more acid in time anyway, even though we're using a premixed, more pastel color. Okay, let's do this. There actually looks to be a lot more pigment than I originally thought, which is exciting. I'm very excited about this 2-ply base. But I'm now gonna go ahead and add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I am going to just quickly raise and lower the yarn. My decision when or not to increase the acid depends on how quickly the colors are striking. Some pigments can strike super, super fast. But anyway, we'll be back in 30 minutes. Okay, it has been 30 minutes. And yeah, the color has all absorbed. It's all in our yarn. This is a very like peachy pink, very pretty, very vintage feeling. But I am going to turn off the pot and set this aside to cool so then we can wash it. I'm coming in now with the Steam. It's the Superwash Merino Alpaca blend, which is beautiful. It's definitely one of the softest ones, and I'm just a sucker for a 2-ply construction. I enjoy seeing that definition. And once again, I am adding some soap, but I'm not expecting to see bleeding here, and we don't. The one where we may see some bleeding is the wool Tencel blend, just because if any of the Tencel fiber is holding on to some of the dye, it may not release it. But we gotta wait for that to cool to see. So again, I'm going to rinse out the soap, put this through my spin dryer, and we'll wash the last one. Steam is a lot of fun. This is the 80% fine superwash merino wool, 20% baby alpaca. It is so high twist. Well, maybe it's not that it's mega high twist, but it's a 2-ply yarn, and so it's extra bouncy, and you have really defined plies. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is like super high twist. It does have a lot of loftiness to it. I think it's just that the plies are a little bit thicker. But this is something I really, really like about yarn. I think that the way it takes up and shows off color is really beautiful. I would say the yarn bloomed a little bit with dyeing. You can see how the twist, this looks more round and like there's just a lot of stretch to it. I mean, there's a lot of stretch to the yarn here, but it definitely bounced back a bunch when dyed. For a worsted weight yarn, this doesn't have a ton of yardage. There are 190 yards per 100 grams. But again, this is something that would be really fun for like mittens and hats. It would have a lot of warmth to it because of that alpaca content, and it feels nice and soft to me. I wouldn't necessarily classify it as, oh, this is the softest alpaca blend I've ever felt in my life, But it is really soft, it's really nice, and I really like it. And I think that both the yarn construction and the fiber content are really unique. And those are things that really excite me because I don't think I have dyed a base quite like this one before. So I'm really excited to dye up more of this base. And I think one of my favorite things about trying yarn from new suppliers is trying yarn bases that are different from things I've tried before. And that's something that I find really, really exciting. And this base is really, really wonderful. Again, we're gonna need to check back on the price of everything because I'm doing this evaluation right now solely based on feel and the experience of actually dyeing it. And then finally, ooh, this is the Asperitas. This is the 50% recycled wool, 50% Tencel. It is a sock weight, but it is, well, it doesn't feel that dense, but I think the fibers might be a little denser. There's only 350 yards per 100 grams. And this is probably gonna dye in a really fun way. It does still have a softness to it. It does feel a little bit cottony, I guess I would say. It smells like yarn, it smells good. It probably has some really good strength to it from that Tencel fiber content, and I expect it would dye up with some really beautiful heathering, like a wool cotton blend or something may. And so this is another base that I think is really fun and I'm excited to explore. Next up is Asperitas, which is the one non-superwash yarn, and it's 50% recycled wool, 50% Tencel. This pot had 16 cups of water, 4 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I just added 1 gram of hyacinth to the dye bath. And we are gonna bring the temperature back up to dye the yarn. Okay, we are steamy. And let's add in this yarn. Ooh, the hyacinth color is really pretty. Really, really pretty. Now, the color I'm expecting here to look darker once it absorbs all the color, and it'll probably lighten a fair amount once the yarn dries. At least that is my experience with wool and cellulose fiber blends. This color is a lot more pigmented than I expected with just 1 gram. But anyway, I am gonna go ahead at this stage, 1, 2, 3, and add 3 more tablespoons of white vinegar, just because we can see there's a lot of color in here and it'll probably take some time to absorb. So I will be back in about 30 minutes. It has been a while, and again, this color is so much more pigmented than I expected, but I expect the yarn to, again, look significantly lighter once it has cooled. I do want to add more acid because we still have color in there, but given that, just add a bunch, this yarn is 50% cellulose fiber, which won't absorb the dye, and then also 50% non-superwash wool. The wool that is present has more dye to absorb than any of the other colors that we're playing with today. So needing a bit more heat and time is reasonable. But I think at this stage, I'm going to turn off the heat and leave the yarn in here to cool completely. That isn't very much color in comparison to the amount that's in the yarn, but sometimes a slow cool off can help the yarn absorb the rest of the color. After 30 minutes of cooling off in the pot, things are still warm, they're still steamy, but it's now looking like just about all that color has absorbed to the yarn. I'm gonna go ahead and leave the yarn in the pot to cool because extra heat won't hurt anything. Especially, I mean, this is a non-superwash yarn, but I'm not gonna agitate it and move it around a ton. We'll just let it cool off slowly. All right. Now, I think if we see any color bleeding with this one, or really if we had with any of them, that would be about the dye and not about the yarn base. But I do want to be more careful with rinsing this one. I will say that right now on camera, I think, oh, Maybe I was a little bit overexposed. This is pretty saturated. And I mean, it's really, really beautiful. I'm gonna add some dish soap. I'm curious if this will cause any color to come out, but we did give this one a lot more time with exposure to the heat and the Dyed Acid clear. So I am optimistic and it looks great. It looks really, really great. Now I want to rinse out the soap, but I also want to do one more thing and show you the yarn before and after I put it in the spin dryer. Because oftentimes, well, what I'm expecting is that this will look a lot less saturated once a lot of the water is spun out of it, even if it's still damp. But I'll be back once the soap is done. Okay, even just squeezing out the water, it gets a bit lighter. But let me pop it in the spin dryer and come back. Maybe it's not that dramatic yet. It definitely has a sheen to it from that Tencel. And I can say, which I think with the light could be hard to share because of the sheen, but you can see heathering in this from the blend, which is really, really lovely. This was a less dramatic change than I originally thought, but I'm still expecting it to look even lighter once it is dry. Asperitas took me by surprise in a few ways. One, and this could be the dye, but the color here is still very, very vibrant. I was expecting things to feel a lot more muted, like when I did Galileo, which would be 50% viscose from bamboo, or another wool cotton blend where, you know, the average of the cellulose fiber in there makes things more muted. The yarn here is heathered, but you still feel so much of the color. And this lighting is very soft lighting, but the yarn is shiny. And that's really cool and not something I appreciated when looking at the bare yarn. Asperitas bloomed the most with dyeing. Look how thin it looks right here versus how it looks after it dyed, where there's just a lot more air in it. It's really, really pretty. Okay, I turned off the softbox so you can try to see how shiny the yarn is. It's a bit reflective. It is, as you can see it especially down here, it is so cool. Just as a reminder, the Asperitas yarn is 50% recycled wool, 50% Tencel. And I think this is the first Tencel blend I have ever dyed. I could be wrong, but as far as I can remember, I don't think I've dyed something with Tencel in it before. And unlike, well, I guess maybe like viscose had some shine to it, which was cool. But I don't know, I really, really like this base. Is it the softest thing I've ever felt? No. But for non-superwash recycled wool cellulose fiber blend, I think that it feels to me, so there's a softness to it. It feels a little bit like cottony almost, would be the way that I would describe it. And I'd be really excited to make something out of it and just see how it behaves. I imagine the Tencel would give it a good amount of strength. And so I'm just really, really excited. I am really excited to do some color comparisons of this base versus, say, just 100% Superwash Merino and see how different depths of color look on this compared to something else. Just because I don't know if like the Tencel is just a little bit more translucent than some other fibers or what, but I am very, very intrigued. Let's take a look at the prices. Now, when you explore the website, the prices that you see listed are the prices of a single skein, basically a price of a sample of the yarn. There is a significant discount per skein once you buy a pack of 10. And that discount is significant. It is between $3 and $4 across the board. The price in the pack of about $11 a skein for the Salcanty seems a tiny bit expensive. There is a yarn at Wool to Die For that I haven't tried that is a similar 2-ply bulky weight superwash merino, and I think that without wholesale pricing, that's about $8.50 for a skein. The pricing of the Snowdrift and the Marshmallow are very reasonable and within what I would see from other brands. Again, the individual skein pricing seemed high, and so I had an initial uh-oh kind of instinct, but once you buy the pack, it is cheaper. And I haven't reached out to get terms of any wholesale contracts. Usually to get wholesale account access, with a lot of companies, you either need to spend a minimum amount per year, or you need to have a federal tax ID number, an EIN, to set up a wholesale account. So I'm not sure what level of additional discounts are available. This is all just based on retail pricing. Overall, some of this is on maybe the more expensive side of what I might ordinarily pay, but I routinely buy yarn that is more expensive than some of these per skein, so therefore I am not having extreme sticker shock. But I would say that if you're interested in buying any of these bases, I would reach out to Knomad and ask about their wholesale options. I have to say I am really, really happy that a representative from Knomad reached out to me and offered to send me yarn so I could take a look at and review. I didn't know a lot about the company, except I knew other people in the ChemKnits Lab Facebook group who really liked their yarn, and so I'm excited that I was able to finally give it a chance. My 3 favorite bases are definitely the Salcanty, the Steam, and the Asperitas. And then after that, I would say the Marshmallow DK, and then last, the Snowdrift. It's pretty amazing that I started talking about them in the order that I did. That was just the order I decided to do it from when I unboxed the yarn. I didn't know that my order of preference would go that way. I appreciate that Knomad is trying to ethically source their materials, and there seems to be a lot of emphasis on using recycled materials, specifically recycled nylon, in a lot of the yarn bases. So that Snowdrift and some of the other yarns that have nylon in them are using a recycled nylon source. And then, of course, our Asperitas is recycled wool. You know, I'm trying to think, because when I see bare yarn, I just think of a blank canvas full of possibilities. And so I think that it takes a lot for me to be disappointed in a bare yarn base. All I can do is sort of compare it relative to what I know. And I mean, I guess at times when I'm looking at something already dyed, it's really easy for me to be like, oh, I don't like that color. But I love yarn. I love really soft yarn and yarn that isn't quite as soft too. One of the yarns I knit with the most, a lot of other people consider to be scratchy, but I really like it. So really, everything here is all relative. I did my disclosures at the beginning, but I also just want to disclose again that Knomad did send me all of this yarn for free, so that way I could test it out and review it. But this video is not sponsored and I was not paid to create this content. So will I be making a purchase with Knomad in the future? Probably. I am not about to change and make them my main supplier from bare yarn. I'm not going to switch the staples I use to these bases. But I did really like these 3 yarn bases, and there are other yarns on their website that look exciting and I really want to play with. So I definitely could see myself making a purchase in the future. Ultimately, it depends on how quickly I move through the almost 50 skeins I have left from their generous gift. And I think the fact that I am honestly excited to dye up more of these bases and feature them in other videos does say something. I am under no obligation to continue to feature the yarn, and I would like to use it and play with it. I think that the yarn took up color really beautifully. I think that the yarn was packaged with care and a lot of respect, and I am really, really excited to see what else I can create. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time that I post. I have no idea how long or short this video is. I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit long, but I did want to give a very in-depth first impression. And so if there are any other brands or any other bases that you would like me to look at and review, please let me know down in the comments below. And if you've already been a subscriber and a fan for a while and want another way to support the content here, I do have a Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/ChemKnits to learn more about the fun perks and things that I offer to ChemKnits patrons. And speaking of patrons, I would like to give them a really big thank you. I filmed part of this video while doing a Patreon exclusive behind the scenes sneak peek. And in doing that and talking with the people in chat, I decided how to structure this video, and that was really, really helpful. So thank you so much, KnitPicks patrons. And thank all of you for watching. I am so excited with all of the videos that are coming up, and I can't wait for you to see them. Bye, everyone!